Beautiful. Tonight we're going to talk about the holiday of TuBishvat and a little bit of background on it. Just the name of it, literally, it is the Jewish month. Right now, we began the month of Shvat. There's lots of months, Tishrei, Kislev, etc. Now we're in Shvat, and the two are the two Hebrew letters Tet and Vav, that if you say it, it sounds like two. And interestingly enough, the way that Hebrew letters and numbers work is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, is 1, second Bet is 2, etc. Then you get up to Yud, which is 10, and then you just start adding on letters. So Yud 10 plus Aleph 1 is 11. The reason I point that out is 2 is the 15th. The number 9 and the number 6 together equal 15. But usually we do 10 and 5. But the reason we don't do the letter 10, Yud, and Hey 5 is because Yud and Hey is one of the names of God. So instead, the common custom is whenever you have two letters together that would spell God's name, you do a variation, hence TuBishvat. So what's so important about the 15th of the month of Shvat? We'll learn about that in just a moment, but one of the things that's important to notice, for many people, TuBishvat is nothing more than a day when you take out a certain part of the prayers. There's a part of the morning prayers, Tachanun, which you're bowing, falling before God, supplicating, saying, God, please help me. And on days of great joy, we don't do that. We don't fall on our face. So for some people, that's all TuBishvat is. TuBishvat has changed very much in what it is over the generations. Today, in fact, the second half of this class will be about one of the modern meanings of TuBishvat, which is kind of a Jewish Earth Day, but it's also become kind of a picnic day in Israel. I imagine not this year. For others, it's a deeply spiritual, mystical, Kabbalistic day. And it used to be a long time ago, purely legal holiday. So we're going to look at a little bit of that shift and try and understand what happened. So the first thing I'm going to do is, Elizabeth, I'm going to unmute you. You'll read the first source, and this is the original understanding that we have of the significance of this 15th day of the month of Shvat. Why did it matter to our people? And we're talking 2,500 plus years ago. So please, Elizabeth, from the Mishnah.
Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, gardening season. The 4 New Years are on the 1st of Tishrei, the New Year for years, on the 1st of Shvat, the New Year for the trees, according to the words of the house of Shammai. The house of Hillel says on the 15th thereof.
Excellent. So back up, explain what's going on here, and then jump back into the text. So to make this text make more sense to us, we have something very similar to this in our American calendar. In April is tax season. Every year there's a date when you need to get your taxes in. January 1st is the day when you're counting the years. When does it become 2020, 2021 on January 1st? There are multiple days throughout the year. Election day, there's an election day in November every single year. So if you want to say, how many years has it been since the last election? You could count from January 1st, but it might make more sense to count from the last November. So there's significant days in the year that are only significant for different things. So there's a day for taxes, a day for elections, a day for the new year itself. So we have the same thing in the calendar. If you are figuring out the Jewish year, 5781, 5782, etc., that's when Tishrei is. If you're figuring out the new month for when a king is inaugurated, when he becomes ordained as the new king, there's a special date for that. And if you're a farmer, there's certain mitzvot in the Torah that connect us with the land, that remind us that the land, the crops, everything come from God. And in order to do that, some of the mitzvot that only apply in the land of Israel say that when you plant certain fruits, you can't touch it. You can't eat of it. You can't harvest it, anything for a certain number of years. And that's the mitzvah called Orla or Orla. And again, that mitzvah reminds us that for those first few years, hands off, because everything comes from God, and it reminds us of God's ownership of the land. But the question is, when do I start counting those years? Do I count it from the moment I plant it, or do I do it from an official calendar? So let's say I plant it one day before the new year for trees. Then that would be basically, you would count a whole year having passed. The same thing with a king. You could say a king was a king for 25 years, but depending on when he started his kingship, he may have only been a king for a week, and then it's the new year. It's actually, the new year for kings is actually the same as the new year for years on the 1st of Tishrei. And if he becomes the king 2 weeks before that, as soon as Tishrei comes, you say he's been king for a year. So that's super technical. It's for record keeping, etc., like that. That's what TuBishvat is. It's for record keeping to know how many years before you're allowed to use your crops. If that seems not too exciting, remember the point is to connect us to God and remind us of God's ownership of the land. But basically, it was that. It was a record keeping thing. It was a purely practical date in the calendar. Well, then tragedy struck our people. We were exiled from the land. There were always Jews living in the land, but as a people, we were no longer farmers. We were no longer living in the land of Israel. So many of our laws about sacrifices, we stopped doing that. We came up with prayers to remember the sacrifices. But the agricultural farming stuff, we really lost sight of that. And the truth is, probably for hundreds, if not 1,500 plus years, Tu B'Shvat really didn't have much significance other than that it was on the books. And that's very important for our people, as we always kept records of our traditions. But basically, it was just something that we will do when we go back to the land of Israel. Now, if you put that idea aside of Tu B'Shvat, there's a new thing that's coming on the scene, and it's been coming again for at least 1,000 years, if not more. And that's mysticism. And without going into a whole class about Kabbalah and the history of it, one of the basic ideas of mysticism is our physical actions down here have a cosmic impact, meaning this. When I say a prayer, when I pray to God, I'm not just doing something for myself, I'm bringing good energy into the universe. And I'm being very spiritual about it because that's what it is. But here's the other thing. When I do an act of charity, I'm bringing good into the world. But when I do an act of destruction, I kill, I steal, or I eat food without saying a blessing over it, I'm bringing bad energy into the world. And one of the jobs of the Jewish people, and really anyone can do this, is to try and bring good energy to fix the broken world that's been shattered really since creation through good actions, through physical actions. And one of the ways that we do that is with saying blessings over food. And one of the other ideas there is that food can either be a tool for good, saying a blessing, recognizing God's goodness, just like what the commandment in the Torah is supposed to do, or it can be something, someone can be a glutton and overeating or just abusing food. So there's every single thing in the world. Money can be given for charity, or you can use it to buy corrupt and evil things, etc. Your words can hurt someone and they can help someone. So everything in this world, every action, every one of us can do, can have good things and bad things. So now let's go back to fruit. So the first time we see fruit really in the story of mankind is, and I'll ask you, Elizabeth, not a trick question. What's the first famous fruit at the beginning of the Torah? I'm setting you up for success here. What's the first real mention of fruit where it's a significant part of a story? There's a snake.
The apple.
Yeah, so we actually don't know that it's an apple. That was probably a later translator, because I don't think they had apples there. We don't know. Because the Torah only says it was a fruit, might have been a date, but we don't know. But you're right, everyone says it's the apple. Regardless, it's a fruit that was eaten. Now, what happened is that fruit was eaten with turning away from God, not recognizing God's oneness and universalism. It was eaten and used for bad, and it hurt us. So what we find is that in the Kabbalistic mystical movement, they recognize that fruit can also be a vehicle, a way for us to do good. And what comes out is that Tu B'Shvat is now seen as an opportunity to turn fruit into something good and constructive and fixing the mistakes of Adam and Eve. And where we see that is in this awesome next text. Brian, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you for this. This is the first ever Tu B'Shvat Seder. And now what you'll see here was written probably 1728 or so, not that long ago. So the idea of turning Tu B'Shvat into this mystical way to correct the mistakes of Adam and Eve through eating fruit and saying blessings is a fairly recent idea. It was in Tzfat, and part of that is there was a resurgence, a rebirth, and a focusing, like people were writing books and really systematizing, making a proper movement out of mysticism in Tzfat in the 17th century under teachers such as Isaac Luria, also known as the Arizal. And one of his anonymous students, or of the people around him, wrote this book. And it was a culmination. Everything I've just said, whether you were paying attention or not for the past couple of minutes, this is a culmination of really every Kabbalistic idea as how can we do something physical and concrete in this world to fix the broken spiritual state of this world. And Brian, go ahead. This is how they explain it, please.
Although the 15th of Shavat occurs during the days of the Shovavim, it is not a fast day since it is the New Year's Day for the fruit of the tree. Through the tikkun that is performed on this day with fruit, the Sephira, Tzaddik, life of the worlds, is aroused.
Pause there for a moment, just because I don't want to go into every little thing, but explain some of those things. So Shovavim are these days where it's a period of the year where you fast on certain days. And we don't do that because it's a special, holy, happy day. It's the new year for trees. The word tikkun means to repair. It can literally mean like repairing a broken stereo, but it also means undoing the spiritual brokenness in the world that's brought down through sin. So mitzvot undo the damage that is the sin. And the sfirot are, again, that's way beyond the idea here, but basically God is everything. God is light, God is dark, God is good, God is evil, God is justice, God is mercy, God is everything. But if somebody is really sick and you pray to God, you're not going to say, God, be really just and strict with this person. You're going to pray that God is merciful. And if someone is very evil, you're going to pray that God show justice and be strict with that person. So the Sfirot are just a way for us to think about the different ways that God can interact in this world. Just like you would, go to a judge, can you be really nice? Or judge, throw the book at that person. So too, it says here, the fruit bring out the righteous life of the world. It's, the good, loving aspect of God. Please continue this mystery.
This mystery is mentioned in the Zohar Bereshit. On the third day, the earth made fruit from the potency of that tzaddik, as it is written, and God said, let the earth bring forth fruit trees that produce fruit. Fruit trees refers to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that bears fruit. That produce fruit alludes to tzaddik, the foundation of the world. It is a good custom for the faithful to eat many fruits on this day and to celebrate them with words of praise, just as I have instructed my companions. Even though this custom is not mentioned in the
Lurianic
writings, it is nevertheless a wondrous tikkun on both exoteric and esoteric
levels, meaning inner and outer. So of all those weird ideas and everything like that may or may not be over your head, one thing to point out there is, again, this is 1728, and the author of this says, this is not even a custom going just from my school. So he's not claiming this is an ancient custom at all. He says it's a very new thing. And again, it's a culmination. They have finally taken all these Kabbalistic ideas, and this person, and probably a few others came up with it together, said, here's a beautiful idea to take what we've been learning in secret, really, for hundreds of, thousands of years, and turn it into a practical, beautiful ceremony. And tzaddik, the word they've used over and over again, is someone righteous, and the world is built on righteousness. And we're always trying to get back to that. And again, that tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, again, depending on how you use it, it can bring evil into this world or it can bring good, but it's built on the right thing, on justice, on good. And he's saying here that this TuBishvat Seder can remind us of those values, but even again, just the Seder itself, saying blessings, reading beautiful texts can actually bring good into this world. Because again, just as Adam and Eve sinned with fruit, we here do a mitzvah with fruit. So there's so much more that can be said about this and digging in and, spending a lifetime learning mysticism, but that's the basic idea, is our actions, our physical actions can bring good and make this world a better spiritual place. And one of the ways to do that is through eating physical objects and saying blessings over them, and how appropriate to take one object, fruit, that was used to almost destroy humanity and make us fall from grace and basically break the world, and use it to help rebuild the world. That is what it is in the Hasidic circles. And again, it's changed even since then to a kind of Jewish Earth Day, but it was basically a dormant holiday really until this TuBishvat Seder and this custom started. So that really is TuBishvat in a nutshell. So I'm going to pause there before we go to the second part of the class and ask for any questions. Again, if you want to dig any more into this text or just in general and anything I've said. So positive. Welcome to everyone who just joined. But yeah, anybody have any questions or thoughts? Yeah, Ken, please.
Isn't it strange though that, I mean, it took till a couple of 100 years ago for that to start? You would have thought that, gee, it's sort of obvious. In a certain sense, if you have the TuBishvat, wasn't that marked down on a calendar that it was a certain thing, and that people would have been able to make the connection much earlier?
Sure. So I don't know if you had joined at the beginning, but again,
I missed. My clocks
so
are all wrong.
so in very short, the original Tu B'Shvat was merely, like we have tax day and we have election day. So Tu B'Shvat was a day like that for any mitzvot in Israel having to do with fruits, where you have the mitzvah of Orla, where you can't eat it for a few years. Then in exile, which we're still sort of in, it had very little significance. And unlike the sacrifices that turned into tefillot, Tu B'Shvat didn't really have a practical way to be acted on. Now, the second thing that you may not have intended, but is a good question as well, mysticism has been alive and a rich thing and developing for thousands of years. And regardless of the debates about when the Zohar was written, when all the texts were written, mysticism is ancient, without question, and it certainly exists in the time of the Talmud and before. So why didn't we create a Tu B'Shvat Seder? And a big part of that is because the concrete idea of taking physical objects, doing physical actions, literally the way my feet are, the way my hands are in prayer, and that having as much impact as just the mitzvah of shaking a lulav, but everything I do, the way I carry myself, can affect the cosmic universe. That idea really developed under Isaac Luria in Sfat in the 16 and 1700s, and his school and his teachers and his students. So the idea that you could have a meal, a Seder, in which literally eating certain kinds of fruits and mixing together different colors of wine somehow can make the universe a better place, as much as eating matzah on Pesach, no one had really brought that idea before. Up until that point, mysticism was about understanding the universe and infusing meaning into our relationship with God. But the idea that how many steps I take, and again, all these Kabbalistic traditions, which have found their way into Hasidic groups today, and in fact, the Chabad Sidur, and I think many Hasidic Sidurim, they say, oh, it's the Chabad Nusach. It was influenced and edited somewhat by their rabbis, but technically it's just the Nusach, the version of Isaac Luria. And I don't know if they'll say it in there, but in Sfard and other Sidurim, it'll just say, this is the version of the Sidur based on the customs of the Arizal, Isaac Luria. And that's really important. Again, he said you can make minor changes that'll affect the entire universe. Until he really established that, a Tu B'Shvat Seder would not have made sense. So I think that, and this is just me guessing out there, we have to go back in time, the Tzfat mystics were looking for a way to bring Lurianic Kabbalah to find a practical ceremony, and Tu B'Shvat just kind of made sense for them. That it didn't. Pesach already had enough customs. Yom Kippur has enough going on. You're not going to create a new holiday. Definitely can't do that. But Tu B'Shvat is kind of just sat unused, and it was a great vehicle to bring all of the Arizal's ideas into formation. And I think a lot of people forget about people forgetting that Tu B'Shvat used to be an agricultural holiday. I think many forget that it's a deeply mystical holiday that really is the culmination of Lurianic Kabbalah. But again, when it became to modern Israel, it took on an even newer meaning of kind of Earth Day or go to the park day. So are there any other questions? And if not, we'll go into part 2 of the class. Beautiful. Ken, since you are unmuted, I'll just leave you that way. And this next section is really important for me, particularly today with climate change, global warming, pollution, but also all the industries in terms of meat consumption. And it's not that all these things need to be wiped out, it's that they're getting out of hand. And we are, I don't have to sugarcoat it, we're destroying the world that God gave us. And the question is there anything in our text that urges us not to do that? And it turns out that there's some pretty powerful ancient texts that are quite progressive in terms of our relationship with the environment. So the first place to start is in the Torah, in Breshit. So please, Ken, source number 1.
And God blessed them, Adam and Eve, And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and populate the world and subdue it. And you will rule over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the sky and all wild creatures roaming the earth. And God said, behold, I have given to you all seed-bearing plants on the face of the earth and all fruit trees for eating.
Thank you. So I believe it's
Vegetarians!
well, you'll like the rest of this class. But I believe it was Ramban Nachmanides who suggested or commented, I think, on these verses that man was really given the permission by God to really do anything with nature, for creation and science and all these things, and just take advantage is not the right word, but to take nature and make something better of it. But that's not where it ends, because if that's true, then what we're doing to the environment and fracking and everything like that, which, by the way, it's not black and white if fracking is always bad. That's a whole other conversation. But we are definitely abusing the world. And the question is, we should be able to do whatever we want. It's ours. God gave it to us. So Gloria and Leonard, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Just have to click on your side. And excellent. Gloria, if you could take this midrash, it's from Kohelet Rabbah. It's a compilation of midrashim written around Israel and Babylon in the 8th to 10th century. So it's we don't really know exactly how old this particular midrash is, but it's old enough. Please, source number 2.
Clean up after yourself. At the time that God created Adam, he led him past every tree in Gan Eden and said to him, see how beautiful and praiseworthy are my creations. Everything that I created for you. Be careful not to damage or destroy my world. For if you damage it, there will be no one to fix it up after you.
Yeah, it sounds like a very modern idea and a very modern value, which is you only get one world. And if you destroy it, that's it. You don't get a second one. And again, this is an ancient midrash. And that's really a powerful thing is, yes, God gave us a great gift, but with great gift or great power comes great responsibility. God gave us the world, but he also gave us the responsibility and the charge to take care of it. Now, if you're going to say, well, that's a beautiful midrash, but that doesn't have any legal standing, we do actually have mitzvot, or a major mitzvah in the Torah that really does establish the idea that we cannot wantonly destroy this world. And even though we're allowed to do certain things to this world, that doesn't mean we can just do it without thought, and we still need to be very conscious of our relationship with this world. And there's a whole dozens of sources that I decided not to share, but that basically talk about how much value there is in nature and how animals have so much to teach us. There are even texts that imply that the very trees are able to praise God. Nature is something sacred and important, and it has just as much a right to exist as we do, even though our law and our tradition gives us permission to cut down trees, to eat animals. We still need to temper that with, again, thinking about the big picture. And that's a huge lesson for people today, is people who say, I don't really care about the big picture, I care about the bottom line and getting my car to drive as fast and as big as possible. But the Torah really urges us, think about the greater impact and consequences down the line and beyond yourself. So Leonard, if you would take this source number 3, and this is right out of the Torah, a mitzvah which we have seen in other contexts before, but some of the commentary after it, I believe, is new. So please, Leonard.
When you lay siege on a city for many days in order to capture it, do not destroy its trees by an axe, for you shall eat from them, and you shall not cut down. For is a tree in a field a man that it should be besieged by you? Only those trees which you know are not for eating can you destroy and cut down.
Excellent, thank you. This is such a powerful and beautiful mitzvah, so much going on here, but the context is they're about to go to war, whether it's for conquest, for self-defense, but really it's a life and death situation. And God points out 2 things. He says, you may be at war with other humans for multiple reasons, whether I commanded you to, or you're protecting your lives, but I did not command you to destroy my world. God is very explicit there. You are not at war with nature. There's actually a famous movie, I don't think it was very good, where trees actually went to war against human beings and started causing them to kill themselves. But we're not at war with nature, except unfortunately for anyone who has gone outside into Los Angeles or too many cities around the world, it looks like we're at war with nature and nature is fighting back, but we're not, and we shouldn't be at war. And the second thing here is that yes, they're in a battle for life and death, for survival, for settling the land, for so many reasons, but the war will be over. Win or lose, the war will be over, and people need to eat. There needs to be a world to go back to after the war. So if you do scorched earth, yeah, you might win the war more easily or more quicker. If you drop a nuclear bomb, it'll be over in seconds, but you also have destroyed the world that you were trying to protect and save in the first place. There's so much to unpack in that source there. And the next source here, Elizabeth, have I unmuted you yet, Elizabeth? Excellent. So if you unmute yourself on your side. This next source here is Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, again, one of the famous rabbis, considered one of the fathers of modern Orthodoxy, 19th century Germany. And he wrote an incredible book that you can get in English. It's pretty thick, but it's almost essential. It's called Horeb, and named after Mount Horeb, one of the Sinai. And one of the things he does is he goes through every mitzvah and explains the reasoning for it. And again, we don't know the reasoning unless God tells us, but rabbis love to guess at the meaning. And Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch does a beautiful job explaining the meaning behind each mitzvah. And here he talks about this mitzvah, which in Hebrew is bal tashchit, do not tashchit, destroy like a shochet. So please, Elizabeth.
Do not destroy anything is the first and most general call of God, which comes to you, man, when you realize yourself as master of the earth. If you should now raise your hand to play a childish game, to indulge in senseless rage, wishing to destroy that which you should only use, wishing to exterminate that which you should only exploit, if you should regard these beings beneath you as objects without rights, not perceiving God who created them, and therefore desire that they feel the might of your presumptuous mood, instead of using them only as a means of wise human activity, then God's call proclaims to you, do not destroy anything, be a mensch. Only if you use the things around you for wise human purposes, sanctified by the word of my teaching, only then are you a mensch and have the right over them, which I have given you as a human.
Just one thing before you go on is a point here, and the rabbis talk about this in other earlier sources, is that even the lowliest ant was still created by God, and everything created by God is infused with some level of holiness. And yes, as humans, we have dominion and we have a higher status because of our soul and our speaking, and that's important. However, at the end of the day, everything around us has the potential for goodliness and godliness, and just crushing a fly for no reason whatsoever is saying, it doesn't really have any purpose, I don't care about it. And that's our inability to recognize God in everything. Please continue.
However, if you destroy, if you ruin, at that moment you are not a human, but an animal, and have no right to the things around you. I lent them to you for wise use only. Never forget that I lent them to you. As soon as you use them unwisely, be it the greatest or the smallest, you commit treachery against my world. You commit murder and robbery against my property. You transgress against me. This is what God calls unto you, and with this call does God represent the greatest and the smallest creations against you, and grants the smallest and also the greatest creations a right against your presumptuousness.
Thank you. Please continue.
In truth, there is no one nearer to idolatry than one who can disregard the fact that things are the creatures and property of God, and who presumes also to have the right, having the might to destroy them according to a presumptuous act of will. Yes, that one is already serving the most powerful idols, anger, pride, and above all, ego, which is its passion, regards itself as the master of things.
Thank you. So one thing we'll see really important, we'll see it come out in some of the last few sources, is this is not talking about somebody who cuts down trees so they can build a house or a boat so that they can go fishing, nor is it even saying that it's inappropriate necessarily to use parts of nature to create technology to make this world a better and even more enjoyable place. But the way that we are abusing this world when we don't have to, that's the key there. when we realize that to sustain a society, we do have to cut down a certain number of trees or drill for a certain amount of oil, that's one thing. But when we realize that coal is not efficient anymore, or that it's, doesn't need to be used as much as possible, and we have much more efficient means, and the only reason that people are not moving to other, wind power or even nuclear power are because they want to stay rich or because of politics. That's a matter of ego and presumptuousness, and destroying the world just for the wrong idea. And he would claim that that's idolatry. That's worshiping the wrong things. Instead of trying to make this world more godly and using it for good, if you're using it for your own selfish means, that's really what idolatry is for, is being completely and totally selfish. I only turn to the gods when it serves me. But the Jewish God is when we turn to because of gratitude and of love. And again, somebody who just wants, it's not that these people just want to destroy the world, it's that they're ignoring ways that we can protect this world because it's not convenient. What's that, the famous movie, An Inconvenient Truth? And if you ignore what is right and good because it doesn't make you more money, that's really idolatry. You're just making the world all about you, and it's causing destruction and suffering. And Rav Hirsch saw this, and we can all see this in the world around us. And most important point of this class is that's a very Jewish value, is that we are commanded to protect this world. And what's really important in this next source, and many others talk about it, and we've seen it in another class, is, well, how do we strike that balance between, so am I not allowed to have an iPhone because they're drilling for this kind of chemical and it might have this impact? Like, where's the balance? Like, do I have to live in a cave and wear leaves that fell to make my clothes? So this is actually a really interesting commentary. Rabbi Baruch Epstein was I believe the son of Rabbi Epstein, who wrote one of the most famous commentaries on Jewish law, the Aruch HaShulchan. And Rabbi Baruch Epstein, Baruch Halevi Epstein, wrote a really cool commentary on the Torah Tamima. So let's see, what do we got in here? Rita, I am unmuting you. And if you would, you just got to click on your side. Excellent. And Rita, if you would please take source number 5.
It is permitted to destroy either trees or other things whenever there is a personal need. And the explanation is straightforward. Since the central prohibition of Baal Tashlit is to protect objects needed by mankind, therefore, whenever the destruction of this object fulfills a need of mankind, their destruction is their very actualization.
Excellent, thank you. So there's a new idea we haven't really seen here, going back to his understanding of the verses that we saw earlier, is why are we saving those fruit trees? And he's saying it's not because we're protecting nature, it's because we're protecting our own futures, not in a selfish way, but we need this world. And that's kind of consistent with the Midrash. So this returns the whole thing is, why should we protect this world? Because if we don't, then we're in trouble. Not about worshiping nature, and people who put nature above their fellow humans, that's not necessarily consistent with Jewish values, although Rav Hirsch took it very strongly, but still, we don't have to make this about tree huggers, which is not a bad thing. But if people say, oh, I'm not into that hippy dippy protect nature, well, then the argument that you can protect yourself, because if you keep burning coal, you're going to get sick, your children, your grandchildren. And again, that doesn't reach everybody. And with classes like this, I'm often preaching to the choir, but it's still important to recognize that this is a Jewish value. And there is a self-serving aspect to this. Humanity, if we wish to exist, we have to protect the environment around us. And what Rabbi Epstein in his Torah Tamima is saying here, just practically speaking, is if you just want to burn something down because you love to burn things and it's fun, absolutely not. If you need to cut down a forest because you're building a town or a village, fine. If there's a human need like iPhones or suntan booths or lotion, whatever it is like that, if there's an actual human need, then yes, you can take advantage of nature and destroy. And destroy doesn't mean like blowing something up. It means using nature for whatever you need. But is there still some kind of limit, some kind of thing we should kind of keep in the back of our mind, even when we go out there and destroy cities and countries just so we can have nice computers? And if any of you Google about, the chemicals inside batteries, et cetera, you understand a lot of why I keep bringing up that example, because they're very toxic chemicals, and acquiring them is one of the biggest industries, I think in Africa, but definitely in the developing world, and it can be very dangerous and destructive. So in the 16th century Shulchan Aruch, specifically here Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the Ashkenazi rabbi, he says there's a custom to which someone who wears new clothes, they should get worn out and be replaced. Which is just kind of like a nice way to be like, you should get such good use out of this that you have an opportunity to buy new clothes. Just kind of like a cute little way to say, I hope you enjoy your new clothing. And he continues, some write that this wish is not said to someone wearing shoes or a belt made out of animal hide, for that would first necessitate the killing of another animal for the purpose of making new ones. Whereas the verse says, his mercies are upon all his works. And I think that you begin to see that attempt to find a balance in the tension here, which is, it's okay to wear clothes that happen to be made of animals, but we also don't want to just go out of our way to create an industry that just keeps perpetuating this, and you have to destroy more animals because of it. I mean, you could even read into this recycle. And I've actually met some vegans who said it's almost better to buy a used leather jacket than a pleather one, because you're not buying a new one. You're not taking, if you buy a brand new leather jacket, then they replace it on the shelves with a new leather jacket. And if you buy a pleather one, they also have to use water and chemicals to make it. But if you buy used, it's a little less destruction into the world. So I think what Shulchan Aruch Ramah is suggesting here is, yes, of course, it's okay to use these things made from animals, made from nature, et cetera, like that, but don't overdo it. And certainly don't do more than you need to. And more important than that, be cognizant of the fact that when you buy a new iPhone, that took a little bit of some chemical or some mineral out of the earth, and it caused a little bit of destruction. And the next time you break it and you're like, it's fine, it's a new iPhone, it's nothing, it's no big deal. Again, it's a little more suffering, it's a little more destruction. And if people could be conscious of that and think before any new purchase, and it's really, at the end of the day, this is really on corporations. Corporations are the ones who are really going to make the big decisions here. But if they think, do we need to do this? What's the big picture? What's the impact? Is there another way to make profits, to make our product without having to burn down another forest? If they would actually put that as a top value next to the price of the stocks, then humanity in this world would be in a much better place, and we'd have a much brighter and cleaner future. So again, we are allowed to create things and use things in nature, but if we temper that with the notion or with the idea that every time we use nature, we're taking a little something away from this world that's not going to be there in 100 years, and we stop and we think about that, it really will help us be more cognizant of the fact that this world is a gift from God. We should be grateful for it, and we need to slow down, because if we destroy it, we're not going to get a second chance. And with that,